Okay, so we're going to start today's chat with Mac and Nat. Hi, Mac.
Hi Nat, how are you?
With a question from Claude. Because Mac and I were talking about complexity and AI and what kind of queries we're navigating at the moment, and we thought we'd give Claude a chance to kind of come into the conversation and ask us a question. So here's the question. What had to break down in your own understanding of coaching before you could start working with complexity rather than against it? And what did that feel like while it was happening?
Would you like me to go first? Would you like to go first?
Definitely.
So, I think for me, that I feel a little bit lucky, to be honest with you, because I think a lot of coaches are going through that right now as they're trying to navigate AI platforms, right? They're saying, oh, augment your coaching with AI. Um, and I find like I don't think I've done that at all, but I can see how that would be very challenging, right? Because there's the fear of like, well, if I don't do it, I'm going to get left behind. So I feel very lucky because I guess it was in 2021. Yeah, 2021. I signed up for this therapy, or essentially Gabor Mate's compassionate inquiry program, to be trained as a trauma-informed therapist. And it was a 9-month program. And when I finished, I had this whole new framework of how to drive an inquiry process with somebody for therapeutic benefit. And I would say for the first year, I was really struggling to think about how to navigate and like pair the two modalities next to each other without sort of bumping into these gray areas that I had really kept as church and state. I was like, well, therapy sits over here and coaching sits over here, and neither shall the two meet. And so it became really challenging internally. I think, getting into these conversations, and then, as you know, like when you get trained in a new modality, your ears are more tuned to the language, and you're like, oh yeah, that's it. And you're like, getting this certainty based on this new language, right? And this new model that you've just, adopted and really invested into. And I think my challenge was really like, oh, I can see where some of these limiting beliefs are, right? To use very coaching language. So the limiting beliefs were popping up, and then we'd use a coaching modality and we'd, see some progress, and then it would pop up again and pop up again, right? And I was like, oh, interesting. This doesn't seem to be working. And then I had this new tool that I learned, and I'm like, oh, I have this new tool, and do you want to go into the past? And it really threw me for a loop because I felt like within that coaching conversation, I wasn't allowed to. So I hit up against some walls of like, oh, my brain felt more complex, but I was still trying to compartmentalize like, oh, me as a coach and me as a therapist. And so I think actually, coming and doing the diploma that we did together and the one that we facilitate really asked me to step back and ask, and I struggled with this question, what are you really doing in a session with a client? And I was like, I don't know. And we rolled into this like discussion and this exploration of this, like, how am I supposed to show up? What does that mean to be in a session with a client? Like, who am I? Like, and how am I wanting to be with this client? I have all these skills, but then what is it that I'm going in with, and what's the intention that I want to go in with? And so it felt very disorienting because I think for about 8 months, I didn't even know if I was coaching. I was just showing up and trying to figure out like, well, how am I best serving this client? That kind of led. And I think, one of the great questions that we were asked is like, well, what is your stance, and what do you want your stance to be? I was like, oh. And I think that exploration and pushing into some of those questions really helped me to land out and be like, oh, okay, this is who I want to be. I bring all these things. I can form a stance rather than just sort of being pushed into one or the other because of the credential that I hold. So I think that was it was very jarring, I would say, because I think that period of unknowing was very confusing. And I would talk to my supervisor, and I would go like, I have no idea what I'm doing here. Like, why do they keep coming back? Like, I don't even know what I'm doing. And he's like, dude, just slow down. It's okay. I don't know if he said dude.
I don't think he'd say
He's an Irishman, so I don't think he says dude.
You may have done.
But yeah, it was really hard. That managing the complexity felt very disorienting. And it felt like two worlds really colliding, and both holding on to principles of this is what it should look like. This is what it should look like, and the integration process was really messy. I would say even maybe painful. Like it caused a lot of inner turmoil. A lot of questions.
Yeah, like quite existential. I think in a way it's having to, we have to move through something existential, I think, in order to get more comfortable with complexity and whole complexity. I think it's almost part of the breaking down of simple stories in the mind that you have to kind of go through in order to then be much more comfortable with complexity. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was mine. How about yours? Do you have anything that
I
comes to
don't
mind?
remember the question again. What had to break down in your understanding of coaching? Um, the thing that's coming to mind for me, I feel, I also feel quite lucky because my entry into coaching was, I initially did my first coaching qualification when I was still at BlackRock, and BlackRock sponsored me to do it because we were running a high potential program. And I'd spent years before being part of the design team and rolling out the leadership programs for BlackRock in Europe and then in Asia. And there was this, and at the time it was really cool because it felt like we were like creating really, well, we were actually creating quite leading edge, innovative training for managers and leaders. That would have been back in 2012, early 2000, what do you call that period? 2010s? Early 2010s. And there was a program that we had at the time for more senior leaders called Influencing for Results, I think it was called. And there was a section on that program called Managing Paradox. And it really, I mean, at the time then, that was pretty innovative for because I think we were starting on the kind of business and global scale to have to manage paradox, but it definitely opened my mind to what a paradox is. And we talked about things like having to manage the paradox of global and regional. Like it's not a problem that can be solved, it's something that needs to just be held. And so I always, that was coming to mind when you asked me then, when you were speaking. And I think I've kind of feel my own identity as, I feel like I've always kind of wrestled with paradoxes. I kind of found myself in one of the biggest high performing financial organizations in the world, and I'm like West Country kid, didn't go to university, came from a single parent family, and I found myself, flying business class to New York, and there was always an internal awareness of paradox, I think. I'm sure you have your own awareness of that. And I wonder whether that in itself actually draws people to be coaches, because we're used to kind of sitting with our own paradoxes and identity and some of that complexity.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, and it's, the line of it's hard to guide people to places that you haven't been before.
Mm.
Shows up for me, and I'm like, yeah, like I think wrestling with some of those polarities really, and have you gone through this existential question, like, what am I doing here?
Mm.
And then am I able to ask that question of somebody else? Becomes, if I haven't asked myself that question, then there's no way I'm going to ask you that question because then I have to listen to this answer that I haven't probably processed on my own.
Right.
And it might be scary.
Yeah,
it's interesting. And I think you're right. I think struggling with that complexity early in your life is helpful, and not having all the certainty. I think that's what I've, even as I think about some of my, I shared with you, I'm going to be going to the US for my business school reunion, my 20-year reunion. And some of my classmates have done extremely well professionally. And I'm like, oh, it's so interesting. And, and it's hard not to compare. I try not to compare. But it's like, my path has been so different. Like, it's been a very windy path. Whereas I've had some of my classmates who stepped on the gas in one company and they made it to the top in 20 years. And so there's, that I think I've always really enjoyed uncertainty. So I think entering a space like now, it's sort of like, oh yeah, I'm kind of okay with this. It's like pieces are moving, but I can kind of keep track of all the pieces. But I know some other people, and I think if you've risen through the ranks in corporate, you're like, well, actually, I like certainty. I want to get to as much certainty as possible and make a decision. Or I'm good with 5 out of 10 pieces in place, and then I'll make a decision. But you still need 5 of the 10 pieces. And I'm wondering, as we're talking, it's like, oh well, how much uncertainty have we had to navigate as coaches? We're navigating it now, right? Like all the balls are up in the air again. Like, do we have a future? Do we have jobs? Where do we go? But yeah, just that I'm curious. That uncertainty tolerance, maybe, is that the right word? Tolerance for uncertainty, skill for uncertainty.
Do you think that uncertainty is complexity?
Yes, and yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, maybe, and I don't know if it's just semantics, but I mean, if you ask any like quant trader, right, and you're like, go predict the market, they're like, well, how much data can you give me? I was like, well, I can give you as much as you want. They're like, yes, no problem. Because it's just, for them, 2,000 streams of data that they'll turn into some prediction. And they have boatloads of it. And they're like, oh, no problem, right? I can handle the complexity because I have a machine that can handle the complexity, which irons out the uncertainty. I don't know, we don't even know anymore. We know everything that happens. So yeah, maybe that's an interesting way to reframe it. Is that our human brain is generally not good at all tolerating and handling complexity.
Mm-hmm.
But the machine and the machines that we have out there now are increasingly better and getting better as we go to handle all this complexity that is existing in the world. And we're really loving it as human beings.
We are loving it.
I think so. I think a lot of people love talking to their robot, to their Claude, to their AIs, because there's so much certainty. Like, where should I go for dinner? Can you plan my best trip, plan my best 3 days to Bali and give me everywhere I should eat, you know?
Yeah. See,
And
I don't. Yeah.
some people love it. I think there's a lot of people who love it.
Yeah. Yeah. The word that's coming up for me is load.
Mm.
Like, I think
Same.
complexity can also be load, and it's like, how much load are we able to be okay with, um, in terms of, yeah, competing opinions, um, the amount of people's opinions and voices that we are now exposed to, um, questions that can't be answered with any certainty. Like, we were talking about AI before we press record, and we don't know how this is all, where this is going, and we were talking about this notion about how people in organizations are having to really quickly adapt and adopt using AI, and yet we've got conversations happening around how the education systems are starting to backtrack giving younger children technology because it's damaging their learning capacities. So there's all this conflicting, paradoxical, information. So there's something for me about load, and how much load are we able to hold without collapsing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think as a parent of two small children, and when I was married, one of the complaints from my ex was always like, "You're not carrying enough of the mental load,"
Mm.
and she was like, "I'm doing all of it," and I'm like, "Well, I also have the other load of how are we going to make enough money so we can pay the rent? How do we keep all these things going?" And now, as a single parent, I'm doing both of those, right? I'm carrying the mental load of childcare, and then also as being the financial provider, and it taxes you, and
Yeah.
and so it's just okay, well, do I have space to do creative thinking, to do anything that's beyond? I call him my robot. My robot worker is very focused and still efficient at getting things done, but not very creative,
Mm.
and not good at asking for help is what I'm learning. And so, part of the challenge is, what happens when the complexity is too great?
Mm.
I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's why there's so many. There's the manosphere stuff, and because even that conversation, I think we talked. Louis Theroux's documentary came up last time, but it's almost like people are reverting to old tropes and stereotypes about men, women, because it's the load is too much to handle because things are so unclear now, gender roles and what is marriage and parenting and career trajectories. It's all so changing and unclear that the load feels too big, and so it's kind of creating these channels of trying to simplify, but in a quite a shadowy, messed up way.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny because I think of it if I was a robot, it's when you have complex problems to solve at every single turn, the easiest way is just to return to the default setting and send it along.
Mm.
And the default setting is whatever we grew up with, as a 4-year-old
Yeah.
kid.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I don't have time to think about it. I need to make a decision and move along. I need to find some certainty in the different places, so I just go, but isn't that the danger, right? And then there's no awareness, right? So then we stop being aware of what the story is, and we just answer the question, send it off, answer the question, send it off. I can do it on my own. I don't need help. And I'm that's actually probably not the healthiest way for me to process things if I was really thinking about it.
Mm.
You know, and but yeah, like how do you keep track of all the complexity really becomes the biggest question, you know? And then how are you making
Yeah.
good decisions? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's part of our role now as coaches is working, being with our clients as they try and manage load, um, because it's so much, it's so complex, and unclear and uncertain. And so I think this is where traditional coaching has changed and has had to evolve, because it isn't just about helping someone achieve a goal. It's about being with load. And it comes back to that point of, if I haven't asked myself these existential questions, we're not going to be able to sit with a client that's asking them, or is being forced to ask them.
Yeah.
So that's why both you and I really, really believe that our own depth, our own inner state, and our own ability to manage load, is really important as we work with people.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's like that's what I really value some of the trauma informed training, right? Because it's really like do the work on yourself. Like, do you know what triggers exist within you so that you're not coming into a session getting triggered and then drowning the person who is sitting in front of you, right? So it's like I think that inner state it becomes so important, right? If like somebody comes and starts talking about like, oh, nah, like I don't know what to do, like AI is like ruining my life and I have lost my job, and you haven't pondered that question yourself, what stops you from going down my hole and me
Yeah.
just taking you down with you, you know? So and then, you know, trying to put on a brave face and ask ask an insightful question while you're spinning down the spiral of like, woe is me. I think it's hard to stay grounded, you know, and I think that is what I love about our work. It's like, oh, okay, well we have to go there first, and we can do it in
Yeah.
a safe space. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was listening to Esther Perel earlier, the relationship expert.
I love her.
Love her. I love her too. Yeah. She was talking about how the relationship between therapist and client has changed, and she was talking about how when COVID, because therapy traditionally is very like, I'm not going to show any of me in this relationship. It's like
Yes.
completely objective. And I've actually stopped working with therapists before because they've just been like too impersonal, there's just no humanity there. I need human relationship. But what she was saying was that during COVID and lockdown, suddenly the relationship changed, because therapists were like, you could see they're in their living room, they were at home on Zoom, people were asking the same questions like, how are you doing, how is it where you are, how's your family, and so there had to be more humanity come into the relationship, because we were all going through the same thing. And I think that's been a big catalyst in coaching as well, because you can't be this like objective questioner. Because we're all in this soup together, and so we have to bring our humanity, and be aware of our own relationship to load and complexity. And
I think I agree with what you've said, and that's the way I was trained as a therapist, and that's why they're like, you have got to do this work yourself if you're going to sit with other people, because it's relational work. And I think that's where I've really loved the practices that Gabor created around, like, how do we connect with the client, how have we made a connection. And it's a lot of attachment theory, right, and vagal theory, polyvagal theory, and so just understanding what is that connection, and we are absolutely in that container as well as coaches, right? I think that's where for me the line between coaching and therapy blurs, and that's the complexity. It's like, oh, like how am I showing up for you? Because you just started talking about your mom and she died, so am I supposed to be like, Bert, please let's come back to what we're talking about your team and about how you can't get your team to do what you want them to do. Oh, and I think that's, so I think in that complexity management it's that question of like, yeah, what is my stance when I am in these highly complex conversations with multi-threads, and am I supposed to keep the threads open? Do I shut them down? Do I focus on one? I think there's a bunch of stuff we don't really talk about as coaches around like, yeah, I mean, the client's just going to sit and talk. So it's your job to process all of the inputs and then be like, what do I do with this like ball that was just laid in the room? Have you ever had I imagine, where people like word vomit? They're just like, blah, and then for like 15 minutes, and they're like, whoa, that was a lot. What do you want to do with that? And I was like, I need a second. And it's just like, where do we go from here? And so it's interesting because our decisions in that, like, where do we go from here, are so valuable. Of like, well, I heard these 4 things that seem to come out of your 15 minutes. And what lens am I using to figure out what those 4 things are? How good is my memory recall from 15 minutes of detail? And I think, that part, we just sort of assume that coaches know how to do that. We say, oh, you just active listen, right? Like, I don't know if it's active listening. But I think, and maybe that's part of the complexity that we are being asked to manage, but we don't really talk about. And it's, when they serve up a plate, how are you navigating the plate?
Yeah, that's complexity in the conversation, right? Because you're hearing different threats. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about the program, is that you get to see, when you're observing each other coaching and being observed, you get to see what threads other coaches pull on. And you're like, oh, I wouldn't have pulled on that one. And it's so interesting, isn't it? Because you don't know, it's such a solitary profession in a way, but you get this insight into like how other people are listening and what they pull on and how they offer back what they're hearing. But that in itself, I'm finding is highly complex. Is how do you decide what to where to go, and that's why I think things like that, the knowing of how to be in relationship, the understanding of what you're hearing, how it's being said, and then the sort of what's not being said, and the why, the what's underneath. And then when what's useful, maybe it's useful to just play back the what, maybe it's useful to give more, and so there's a constant complexity awareness within the conversation itself of where do you go, how do you hold it, what's useful, what's not, what's your stuff, what's theirs, how is it useful to let somebody speak for 15 minutes, and how do you decide? And it's
it's wild, but that's why I love it.
I love it too. I love it because it's so rich. It's so rich in there's so many possibilities. I think that's what I love about coaching. Like, there's so many different places you could go. There's so much going on for people. There's inner stuff, there's outer stuff, there's cultural, collective, interpersonal, there's so much, and that's why yeah, it's important that we do understand our own complexity awareness, our own ability to be with load, and what our stance is, and the lens in which we're looking through.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
So good.
Mm. What's coming up for you now?
I'm really glad we talked about this. I think, yeah, I think it's one of those things. Like, I don't think that I tell people very much like what I do and like
Yeah.
what is going on. So I think this is really helpful because, yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of I don't know, this is my very limited view. I think a lot of the rhetoric out there is have a list of questions and go ask people some questions, get them to understand where they want to go, help them to find clarity. And I think it's evolving. It's evolving quite a bit to, it's asking more of us. And I think people want a richer experience. So, I think that's where, I'm encouraged that there are coaches out there and, there's, even like the work that we're doing to train coaches and to build up coaches that expand that capacity, right? It's how do we expand capacity for coaches so they can handle this with their clients? Because I think our world needs it badly. People can sit with all of this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And AI is great, but and I don't want to open another whole conversation, but it is different. It's different to a human relationship, to bringing to be able to say what impact someone has had on you given what they've just shared, or there's so much more nuance and complexity, I think, and richness to the conversation. But AI has its place too. So perhaps what I was thinking is just to leave the listener with a question, and whether you're a coach or whether you're leading people, the question for you might be, this is from Claude, what had to break down in your own understanding of coaching or your understanding of leadership before you could start working with complexity rather than against it? So that's something perhaps for both managers, leaders, managers and coaches to think about.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Thanks, Claude.
Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God.
Anything else you want to say?
Yeah, I would say if you've been listening and you'd like to talk more about this complexity management, complexity thinking, and we're running another cohort of our diploma program in 2026. So we'll start in September and October, and so there'll be a global cohort, but 2 residential options, and one in the UK and one here in Asia. But yeah, if you'd like to learn more, just I would say send us an email.
Yeah,
or,
get in
yeah,
touch.
get in
DM
touch.
wherever you find us.
Yeah, we're on Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, but come find us, and we'd love to have a conversation with you.
Yeah. Thanks, Mac.
Thank you. See you
Till
soon.
next time.
All right.